I stood barefoot outside the estate gates, the gravel biting into my feet like the truth I wasn't ready to face. My heels were gone, somewhere between the marble steps and the moment I was thrown out. My black funeral dress clung to my skin, soaked in the rain that had started just as they shut the gate behind me. I should have run, or cried, but I didn't. I just stood there, mascara streaking down my cheeks, fingers wrapped around a torn envelope that used to hold my father-in-law's original will. The same will that they didn't want anyone to see. The mansion behind me glowed with soft, expensive light. Music drifted through the windows, followed by the clinking of glasses and muffled laughter. They were celebrating his life and maybe, in their own twisted way, celebrating my exile too. Just hours ago, I stood by my husband's side at the funeral, my hand in his, grieving the man who had shown me more kindness than anyone else in that house. I thought I was family. I acted like family. But the second the casket was lowered into the ground, the masks came off. I wasn't even allowed to finish my drink before security flanked me on both sides. Damien, the man I gave 10 years of my life to, didn't say a word. Not a warning. Not a whisper. He just looked away while they dragged me down the front steps like a stranger who'd crashed a party. They tossed me out like trash right after the funeral, but they forgot one thing. The dead can still speak. Welcome to Nexus of Revenge. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone only to be cast aside when you were most vulnerable, then trust me, you're not alone. Hit subscribe, because what happened next? It shook a $450 million empire to its core. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been discarded by the very person you built your life around only to watch their kingdom fall apart without you? I have. And I didn't have to lift a single finger. The truth is, Theodore Whitman may have passed on, but he wasn't finished speaking. Not yet. You see, the will they read at the funeral, it wasn't the only one he left behind. There was another, one they tried to bury. But I had it, I still have it. And it only took one line, just one final sentence, to bring everything they thought they owned crashing down. They thought they'd won. By dawn, they'd learn otherwise. Because that night, outside those gates, humiliated and heartbroken, I realized something. I was never part of their family, but I was the only one he trusted to destroy it. People look at me now and wonder how I lasted so long in that family. They see the photos from charity galas, the designer gowns, the smile that never quite reached my eyes, and they think she had it all. But they don't know what it cost me. I wasn't born into wealth. I built my name the old-fashioned way, with degrees, sweat, and a sharp mind. I was a legal aid when I met Brandon. Smart, driven, maybe a little idealistic. He was handsome, magnetic, and for a time, he made me feel like the center of the universe. Brandon Whitman, the golden boy with the perfect smile and pedigree to match. He was the heir to the Whitman legacy, an empire of steel, freight, and old money influence. But behind the designer suits and tailored charm was a man who never quite earned anything on his own. Everything he touched, someone else had built. And yet, he walked like a king. When we got married, I gave up my career, not because I had to, but because I believed in what we were building. The company, his father's health, our marriage. I thought I was building something that would last. And in many ways, I did. Just not in the way I expected. Brandon was always more show than substance. Publicly, he played the part of devoted husband and savvy businessman. But behind closed doors, his charm was paper thin. He could be cold, dismissive, especially when things didn't go his way. The more I stepped up, the more he pulled away. At first, I thought it was stress. Later, I realized it was resentment. Still, I stayed. For his father. Theodore Whitman was a different breed altogether. Brilliant, shrewd, and even in his 80s, sharper than most men half his age. He could read a room like a chessboard and didn't suffer fools, even if those fools bore his last name. He didn't trust easily, but over time we built something rare: respect. He used to say, Brandon inherited my empire, you inherited my faith. When the company began to falter, bad investments, market shifts, infighting on the board, it wasn't Brandon who rolled up his sleeves, it was me. I may not have had the title, but I did the work, quietly, relentlessly. I helped restructure the legal framework, renegotiated deals behind the scenes, and stabilized what Brandon was too proud to admit was collapsing. And when Theodore's health began to decline, I became more than his daughter-in-law. I was his nurse, his confidant, and in many ways, the only family he truly had left. Carolyn never forgave me for that. She'd always seen me as an outsider, a nobody from a modest background who didn't belong in penthouses or private jets. Where she was ice, Theodore was fire. She rarely visited her husband in his final years, and when she did, she barely stayed long enough to finish a martini. But she had opinions. Always. If Brandon was an entitled prince, Carolyn was the self-appointed queen, the type of woman who could smile at you while cutting your knees out from under you. And she made it clear from day one. I'd never be one of them. Still, I carried on. The estate was nothing short of palatial. The penthouse in the city was more glass than wall, with panoramic views that made you forget you were still on Earth. The main property, Whitman Vineyards, spanned acres of rolling hills, manicured gardens, and stone paths that seemed to stretch into forever. There was even a guest house bigger than the house I grew up in. But behind the opulence, the family was fraying at the seams. Theodore's company, Whitman Global Industries, had once been a titan. But by the time I entered the picture, it was bloated, outdated, and bleeding from the inside. Brandon liked to blame market disruptions and external pressures, but the truth was simpler: mismanagement and arrogance. I could have let it collapse, but I saw what Theodore had built. I believed it deserved saving. So I saved it. No recognition, no title. Just late nights, hard calls, and quiet wins behind boardroom doors. Theodore noticed, even if no one else did. Near the end, he'd say things like, "You have a mind for legacy, Amelia, not just money." Legacy. I never asked what he meant. Now I think I know. Brandon. He was too busy playing heir to see the cracks forming beneath his feet, and when his father died, I thought, for a brief moment, that maybe all the years I'd given would count for something. That maybe I'd finally be seen for what I was, not just a wife, but the woman who held it all together. I was wrong. He changed the moment the casket was sealed, cold, calculating, and when the reading of the will began, and the wrong version was read aloud. I knew he'd taken everything I built and erased me from it. But what Brandon didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Theodore had left behind a second version. A final safeguard, one written in his own hand, hidden where only I could find it. And in that will was a sentence that would detonate everything Brandon thought he'd inherited. By the time the sun rose, the empire he stole would no longer be his to keep. Theodore Whitman's funeral was exactly what you'd expect for a billionaire patriarch. Cold, polished, and choreographed within an inch of its soul. The church was dressed in white lilies and stiff security, with reporters tucked behind velvet ropes, eager for sound bites and snapshots. Brandon had turned his father's passing into a public relations event. I'd barely had time to grieve. I stood near the front in black silk, my heels sunk slightly into the church lawn from the earlier procession, mascara dried in streaks I hadn't bothered to wipe. I wasn't here to impress anyone. I was here to say goodbye to the man who treated me like family, even when his own blood didn't. And for a moment, I believed I was still part of that family. But grief reveals truths, doesn't it? The reception afterward was held in the east garden of the estate. Waiters floated around with crystal flutes of champagne and canapes no one touched. Guests murmured condolences as they passed, not really seeing me. I caught Carolyn watching from across the lawn, perfectly pressed in navy blue, not a tear in sight. Her gaze was cold, satisfied. I should have known something was coming. Amelia, I turned. Brandon. Perfectly tailored, a performative sadness in his eyes for anyone watching. But up close I saw it, the calculation, The tension in his jaw, the flicker of disgust that passed over his face like a shadow. "What is it?" I asked, voice low. He leaned in, smiling as though whispering a loving word to his wife, but his breath hitched against my ear with venom. "You were never family," he said. "You were just convenient." I blinked. "Excuse me." Before I could fully register the blow, I felt a presence at my side, 2 security guards. Hired muscle in black suits with discreet earpieces and stony expressions, Brandon stepped back, gestured slightly. "Escort Mrs. Whitman off the premises." It took me a second to realize what he'd said. "Brandon," I snapped, my voice rising, "what the hell are you doing?" The murmurs of conversation around us began to fade. Guests were turning to look, confused, some shocked, but no one intervened. Brandon's voice dropped to a silky whisper. "You have no rights here, not to the estate, not to the company, and certainly not to the name. My father left it all to me. You were just a helpful placeholder." I couldn't breathe. One of the guards reached for my arm. I yanked it away. "Don't touch me." Carolyn appeared beside Brandon, her expression unreadable. Except for the slight smug curve of her lips, that one look said everything. This had been planned. I wasn't just being removed, I was being erased. The guards moved again, firmer this time. I stumbled slightly in my heels, barely steadying myself as they marched me past white chairs and guests in pearl necklaces who awkwardly sipped their drinks and looked away. No one said a word. No one stopped it. They dumped me at the front gates like yesterday's embarrassment, funeral program still clutched in my hand. The wind tugged at my hair as I stood barefoot now. I'd kicked off my shoes when I stumbled. My black dress clung to me in the late afternoon breeze, but all I could feel was heat, rage, shame, grief, and then clarity. I pulled out the envelope. It was wrinkled now, the seal cracked, a handwritten note from Theodore. He'd left it in one of his law books, the one on fiduciary ethics. I found it 2 weeks before he died, when I was reorganizing his shelves. It said simply, "If Brandon pushes you aside, don't let him. The final line is for you. Check the safe. TW." I'd brushed it off at the time, thought maybe it was a warning for the board or maybe a forgotten draft of a corporate memo. But now? It screamed louder than ever. And it wasn't just that note. I started remembering the strange things Theodore said in his final weeks. "You're the only one I trust to carry this through. Some things must be protected from those who inherit them." I thought he was delirious. He wasn't. That night I broke. In the safety of my car, parked 3 blocks away, I let it all out. The betrayal, the humiliation, the helpless fury. I screamed into my steering wheel. I sobbed until I was hoarse. And then I went still. Somewhere in the silence of that breakdown, I made 3 decisions. First, I would unseal the backup will. I knew where it was. Theodore had shown me the code to his private safe in the study. The official copy had clearly been swapped. Brandon must have bribed someone. But I had the real one. Second, I would expose Brandon for what he was. A fraud. A thief. A man so consumed with greed he was willing to toss aside the very person who held his empire together. Third, I would honor Theodore's final wish. Whatever that last line said, I owed it to him to make sure it saw the light of day. And somehow, even in the darkness of that night, I knew I wouldn't be the one left barefoot and broken for long. By dawn, Brandon would be the one standing outside the gates, and everything he thought he'd won. Gone. By the next morning, the storm inside me had gone still. Not quiet, not calm, just focused. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't begging for someone to explain how the life I'd poured myself into had vanished in one public humiliation. I was planning. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Not the legal unsealing of a revised will, not the proof of Brandon's deception, and certainly not the reclamation of what Theodore had trusted me to protect. So, I started with the only person who would understand the gravity of what I was about to do. Mr. Granger. He'd been Theodore's personal attorney for over 20 years, a man so meticulous he still used a fountain pen and sealed documents in wax. He had a permanent stoop from too many hours over law books and a memory so sharp he could quote case precedents like bedtime stories. He met me at his private office downtown, one of those old brick buildings that smelled like oak and worn leather. He looked surprised to see me. "Amelia," he said, stepping forward slowly, "I thought they threw me out," I cut in, my voice firmer than I expected. "At the funeral. Brandon and Carolyn. Security and everything." His jaw tightened. "Then it's time." He walked to the back of the room and unlocked a fireproof drawer. From it, he retrieved a small black folder, sealed in red wax, Theodore's initials pressed into the center. My hands trembled slightly as he handed it to me. "He left this for you," Mr. Granger said. His exact words, "For the moment, they betray her. She'll know when it is." I broke the seal with the edge of my house key and unfolded the papers. Inside was a signed, notarized, and witnessed revision of his will, dated 2 weeks before he died. The final line read, "The executor of this estate shall be Amelia Whitman. Let what is hidden be revealed in her time." The breath caught in my chest. Granger nodded at my stunned silence. "The copy Brandon submitted was the second draft. He must have found it before you did. This," he tapped the pages, "is the real one." I swallowed. "And it's legal." "Without question." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply nodded. This wasn't over. It had just begun. I started building my team that night. First was Maya, a friend from my legal aid days. A cybersecurity analyst now, wicked smart, discreet, and someone who once wiped a cheating senator's burner phone in under 10 minutes. I called her from a prepaid line. "Maya, I need to dig into some encrypted files, emails, and bank transfers. Quietly." Her voice crackled back. "Is this about Brandon?" "Yes." "I'm in." Then came Jonas, an estate lawyer who'd worked with Theodore on acquisitions in Europe. More than that, he'd always respected me, called me the real backbone of Whitman Industries when Brandon wasn't in the room. When I explained what happened, Jonas didn't hesitate. "Send me a copy of that will, and be ready to go nuclear." And finally, Carmen, the old head of operations at Whitman Vineyards. She'd been with the family business longer than Brandon had been sober. Theodore adored her. Brandon hated her guts. When I showed up at her modest cottage near the vineyards, she opened the door with tears in her eyes. "I was at the funeral," she said. "I saw what they did to you. You nursed that man like a daughter. I knew something wasn't right." "I need your help," I said. "One last time." Carmen didn't even blink. "Say the word." And so, piece by piece, the plan began. Maya hacked into Brandon's secure email server and retrieved encrypted messages, ones he thought he'd buried. They revealed embezzlement patterns, secret accounts in Dubai, and payment orders to a charity that didn't actually exist. Jonas helped draft the injunction. If we proved fraud, forged documents, and financial misconduct tied directly to Brandon, the courts would freeze the estate and all corporate holdings until a full hearing could be held. But the real goldmine came from Carmen. She'd kept a few backups of the security footage in the main office building. Files that Brandon thought had been deleted. Turns out, he'd been strong-arming board members into silence, using threats of exposure and bribes to control votes. And the worst? There was audio of him coercing a senior accountant into falsifying revenue reports. "You'll sign it," Brandon's voice snarled in the clip, "or you'll be out on the street like her." I listened to that tape 5 times, not because I needed to, but because it reminded me of the mask he wore and how good he was at hiding his venom behind a smile. He didn't just want the money, he wanted to erase me, as if I'd never mattered. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was no longer the quiet wife. I was the executor of vengeance. And I had the documents, the data, and the digital proof to detonate everything Brandon thought he owned. Now, all I needed was the right moment. They didn't see it coming. Not when they paraded around the estate after the funeral like victors, sipping vintage wine from the cellar I stocked. Not when Brandon posted a photo the next morning, captioned "New Beginnings," honouring Dad by leading with strength. Strength? He had no idea what strength looked like. At exactly 5:59 a.m., the first trigger hit. Mr. Granger's team sent Theodore's final will, the legal, sealed, verified version, to every major board member, our legal counsel, the entire board of directors, and select media outlets Theodore had cultivated over the years. And just like that, the truth was out. Every word, every clause, every signature, public, but the real detonation came in the final paragraph. Theodore's closing words, tucked into the bottom of the page in his signature blocky handwriting. Should my son Brandon Whitman disrespect, evict, or otherwise remove my daughter-in-law Amelia Whitman from our home before probate has been concluded, he forfeits the entirety of this estate. All holdings, assets, and liquid capital are to be redirected to the Whitman Legacy Foundation, which shall be solely overseen by Mrs. Amelia Whitman. I was sitting at a small cafe when the ripple effect began. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Texts, missed calls, email alerts. First came the bank notifications. Transfer failed. Account frozen. Suspicious activity reported. Then the panicked call from one of Brandon's senior finance officers. Brandon's corporate cards are being declined. The trust is locked down. Amelia, what's going on? I didn't answer. I just let it play out. Maya had helped set up a system so every alert from their failed attempts would forward to my private dashboard. Watching their digital empire stall in real time was poetic. At 7:23 a.m., Brandon finally called me. The man who couldn't look me in the eye yesterday was now stammering into my voicemail. Amelia, listen, this is insane. That clause wasn't even in the version I signed. How did Jesus? Just call me. Let's fix this. There was no fixing anything now. Then came Carolyn. That same morning, she had a private showing scheduled for the vintage jewellery collection. Theodore's heirlooms dating back 3 generations. She was planning to auction them off through a silent sale. Except she didn't own them. By 9:00 a.m., she was sitting in the penthouse parlour, livid, surrounded by trust lawyers reading the fine print of Theodore's estate. Turns out, the penthouse and its contents weren't willed to her or Brandon. They were placed in a philanthropic trust, designated for historical preservation, with Carolyn allowed to live there only as long as she refrained from selling or transferring anything of value. And since she'd already tried, well, that privilege was gone too. Jonas sent me a photo around noon. Carolyn collapsed on the velvet chaise, clutching a champagne flute like a lifeline, mascara streaks on her cheeks. Her pearl necklace had snapped during her outburst, scattered beads across the floor like spilled power. Poetic justice, served cold. By 1:00 p.m., an emergency board meeting had been called. They tried to keep me out, but I walked in, heels clicking like a metronome, wearing black slacks, Theodore's gold pin on my lapel, and the will in a leather portfolio pressed against my side like a sword. The room fell quiet. Brandon was already there, looking pale. His charm had curdled overnight, smugness replaced by thinly veiled panic. I stood at the head of the table. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, placing the folder down and opening it, "I believe you've all seen the final will." One of the older board members, Mr. Renner, cleared his throat. "It checks out. Every seal, every witness, every clause." Another nodded slowly. "We reviewed the video of the signing. It's legit." Theodore knew exactly what he was doing. Brandon leaned forward, sweat glistening at his temple. "You think you can just walk in here and—" I cut him off. "I didn't walk in here to fight, Brandon. I came to do what your father asked of me." I paused, let the silence settle like dust. "I'm here to honour his legacy, not sell it off." A slow murmur passed through the room. Jonas passed around hard copies of the Foundation's new charter. Carmen stood behind me, stone-faced like a sentinel. I turned to Brandon and smiled. "You could have had it all," I said quietly, "but you wanted more. And now you have nothing. If you're loving this cold, calculated takedown as much as I enjoyed delivering it, smash that like button And stay tuned for the final twist, because we're not done yet, not by a long shot. It's been 6 months. 6 months since I walked out of that boardroom with my dignity intact and Brandon's world in freefall. 6 months since Theodore's final will detonated across the morning news like a controlled explosion. 6 months since I stopped being just someone's wife and finally stepped into my own name again. And I haven't looked back. Theodore Whitman Foundation for Women in Legal Crisis. That's what we named it. He would have liked that. We focus on women who are silenced, discarded, manipulated out of everything they were owed. I've sat across from mothers locked out of their own homes, daughters written out of legacies, and wives thrown out after decades of unpaid labour. I see them because I was them. And now I fund their freedom. I fight their battles. The team I built to uncover Brandon's crimes, Jonas, Maya, Carmen, now help me run the foundation. Our first flagship initiative just launched a month ago, the Whitman Legal Sanctuary. Free housing and legal aid for women rebuilding after marital or financial abuse. People say it's revenge, that I'm out for blood. But they're wrong. This was never about revenge. It was about truth, about dignity, about keeping my promises to myself and to the only man in that family who ever saw my worth. As for Brandon, the last time I saw him was on the news, leaving federal court with his lawyers flanking him like undertakers. IRS, charity fraud, embezzlement, shareholder revolt. The dominoes fell faster than I anticipated. Turns out, when you fabricate a will and funnel funds into shell accounts registered in your mother's name, the paper trail has a way of biting back. Especially when your wife used to be a legal aid and knows exactly where to look. Carolyn fared no better. The ladies' society that once adored her. They cut her off within a week of the scandal. Her designer friends stopped inviting her. The antique dealers blacklisted her after the trusts seized back the auctioned jewels. Last I heard, she was living in a leased townhouse outside the city, paying legal fees by selling off vintage handbags on consignment. Poetic, isn't it? Brandon now rents a modest 2-bedroom condo downtown, surrounded by frozen assets and bitter ex-allies. The man who once couldn't walk into a room without demanding applause can barely walk down the street without getting spit on. He tried to reach out, twice. Once to apologise, once to beg. I didn't respond either time. Peace, I've learned, is not silence. It's closure. The kind that doesn't come from gloating, but from knowing you never had to become what they accused you of being. I didn't burn the house down. I just turned the lights back on and let the world see who they really were. And it turns out, that was more than enough. Then, 2 weeks ago, Mr. Granger asked me to stop by his office. He had one last envelope in the vault marked with my maiden name, sealed in Theodore's wax and dated just 6 days before he passed. Inside was a key, a deed, a letter written in his careful, slanted handwriting. My dear Amelia, if you're reading this, it means you chose justice over comfort. And I was right to trust you. You were never just my daughter-in-law. You were my greatest ally. Consider this home. Not a reward, but a restoration. Of your name, your peace, and your future. The deed was for a villa in Tuscany, paid in full, isolated, surrounded by vineyards, registered under Amelia Rowe. My name, before them. I'm writing this now from the sun-drenched balcony of that villa. The breeze smells like rosemary and ripe lemons. A fountain murmurs in the courtyard below, and a cat I've started calling Vittorio refuses to leave my side. For the first time in years, I sleep through the night. Sometimes I think about the mansion, the penthouse, the corporate offices, how I once wandered those hallways in silence, giving everything and receiving so little in return. And now all that wealth, the companies, the legacy, is being rebuilt not to feed egos, but to fund futures. Theodore left me power, But more importantly, he left me purpose. People ask me if I regret it. If I regret trusting him, loving him, building a life in the shadow of someone else's legacy. If I regret giving up my career, my name, my time, and the truth? No, because regret belongs to the ones who thought I'd stay quiet forever, to the ones who mistook love for weakness and loyalty for leash. What I regret is how long I kept giving when it was clear they only knew how to take. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with knives and screaming. Sometimes it comes with silence, with a soft smile and a forged signature. Sometimes it arrives dressed in black, at a funeral, flanked by security guards, as your husband whispers in your ear, "You are just convenient." I used to believe love could conquer anything, but it turns out greed conquers faster. What saved me wasn't revenge, it was clarity. The moment I stopped hoping he'd become the man I thought I married and started becoming the woman I used to be, the one who read contracts, who paid attention to details, who knew when something smelled off. The quiet ones aren't weak. We're listening. We're watching. And when the time comes, we're the ones who hold the receipts. Theodore knew. He saw the decay long before it showed up in public. That's why he left me not just a second will, but a final weapon. His trust. His words. His name. He didn't write that final line to be petty. He wrote it to test Brandon, to see if the son he raised would fail the woman who gave him everything. And fail he did. Spectacularly. But here's the part no one talks about. Even after justice, after the money and the boardroom standoff and the press, there's a silence that follows. An ache. Because what betrayal really robs you of is belief. Belief that people mean what they say. Belief that love guarantees respect. Belief that loyalty will protect you. I had to rebuild that brick by brick inside myself. Now I help other women do the same. We don't chase revenge, we build recovery, dignity, freedom. And yes, when necessary, we build the kind of consequences that shake foundations. So here's my question for you. Is posthumous revenge truly satisfying? Is it justice? If the one who wronged you never gets to see the full scope of their failure, maybe not. But I've learned this. It's not about vengeance beyond the grave. It's about honoring those who saw your worth when no one else did. It's about making sure their last act wasn't buried in silence. I was thrown out like trash the day we buried Theodore. By dawn, I owned everything they once used to own me. I didn't scream. I didn't fight in public. I simply let the truth speak. And it was louder than all their lies combined. Want more stories where karma doesn't knock, or it kicks the door down? Subscribe to Nexus of Revenge and hit that notification bell, because sometimes the quiet ones write the loudest endings.